Hello. In the last installment of this series, I did a video on telic recursion and conspansion, which are two related and incredibly important concepts to understand in the CTMU. If you haven't yet, I'd recommend you check out the last two videos in the CTMU Made Simple series. The first is called The CTMU Explained in 8 minutes or less, which gives a overview of some basic principles: the metaphysical ontology principle, the mind equals reality principle, and the multiplex unity principle, and some of their implications for both the trajectory of human civilization as well as our understanding of reality and religion and God and physics and metaphysics. And also my last video, which is called CTMU Made Simple, Telic Recursion and Conspansion, which goes deep into each of those concepts. And so the next topic which I want to touch on is infocognition. And Norvays, I think that's how it's pronounced, Norvaeys, it just did a great video on this, and I'll link his channel in the description. But the question which has plagued philosophy and philosophers for centuries is essentially whether mind is supervening on matter, and matter is the more fundamental reality, or whether matter is just a clever construct of universal mind, which is actually the base reality. And the former camp are called materialists, who believe that the universe is fundamentally material, and the latter camp are called idealists, who believe that the universe is fundamentally mental. And a third camp called Cartesian dualists say, and this has been the domineering thought in philosophy to some extent, although it tends towards the physicalist/materialist side, says that both mind and matter are real, but they don't interact at all and can be studied without reference to each other. And this quite frankly is bullshit. And the reason why that must be the case is because we know from experience and just by basic logic that mind processes matter, that our mental experience is of material objects, and that neither mind nor matter can subsist on their own, that they're interrelated at every level, and mind processes information. So with the materialists, once you get to the lowest strata of matter, once you get below quarks and electrons and protons and atoms, once you get to the absolute base material, what materialists think is that what you'll find is information. But what the CTMU says is that the fundamental building block of matter is not information per se. It's something which Langen calls infocognition, which is a unit of self-processing information which doesn't itself take up any three-dimensional space, but constantly internally expands and re-quantizes itself to lend itself to higher orders of coherence, so that they can take on the shapes of various quantum particles, quarks, leptons, whatever, you name it. That they actually give shape to even they can transform into these particles, and they ultimately lend their coherence to molecules, galaxies, clusters, etc. And what the CTMU finds is that mind is actually indistinguishable from matter at every level of analysis, from the quantum to all the way up to the universal scale. So the CTMU supports a dual aspect monism which reconciles materialism and idealism and shows them to be two sides of the same coin. And a single unit of infocognition is called a syntactic operator, and is called a syntactic operator. And once you, or and an uninstantiated syntactic operator, so in between states, is called telesis, which is the fundamental unit of reality in Chris Langen's theory. It's essentially a metaphysical generalization of energy and information to include these cognitive aspects and endow it with structure and the possibility of mental evolution, because it's subsisting within a reality that's both mental and material. And so when you take, a syntactic operator is a zero-dimensional point, but it's similar to Leibniz's concept of a windowless monad, which is a soul, which if you take the set of every single one of infinite, and they combine discreteness and continuity because they can lend themselves to have dimensionality in 3D space. So if you take the set of every single one, that this comprises something called the conspansive manifold, which we went over conspansion in the last video. It's essentially conspansion denotes the evolution of the universe, but the conspansive manifold, a manifold is essentially a model of reality. So we'll say that special relativity, Einstein created a four-dimensional manifold, four-dimensional space-time manifold to account for various problems with relativity, and we'll get into those in a later video. But a manifold is the lattice which gives shape to reality. So if you take the set of every single syntactic operator, then it gives rise to what's called the conspansive manifold, which is the mathematical structure which represents the universe as it evolves over time. So that's the conspansive manifold is the global identity of reality, with which there's the incoercive mapping to every syntactic operator within reality as the basis of causality. So it's the structure which gives shape to the primary teller, to the global identity of reality, to God in the CTMU. So, but what Chris Langen realized is that when you look at the conspansive manifold, when you look at the universe and take into account its structure and evolution, that it becomes not only what language describes, because obviously, right now I'm describing the universe in natural language, but it's actually a language itself. And this is one of the most confusing points for a lot of people in the CTMU. It's called Langen's principle of linguistic reducibility, that reality is actually a language and not only the things which language describes. So think about, and it comes from, and I'm going to explain how this comes from a combination of Noam Chomsky's approach to language with Ludwig Wittgenstein's approach to metaphysics, that if you combine the two, you actually arrive at the CTMU and you arrive at the principle of linguistic reducibility. But before we get to that, just think about what a language is, English, Mandarin, French, whatever. And now imagine that language were silent. There's no, you're not breathing air and actually making noise. So what remains of the language is the attribution and the recognition of a particular thing. So not only human languages are languages, but also scientific theories and even mental constructs. Langen says even cognition and perception themselves are languages because they have a fixed structure which generates complex identifications of reality. And these are, of course, related to human language, which is humans, at least for the last several millennia's way of interacting with and identifying reality. So the analogy between reality and language itself, it comes from that all of these languages, every attribution or identification of reality regresses to reality itself, which is maximally self-identifying. It's ontological, it's self-describing. This is the metaphysical ontology principle, is that it describes and generates itself. And it also generates all object languages within itself and thus qualifies as what Langen calls a meta-language. It's a higher order language. All identifications and attributions are internal to reality itself. And so I said earlier, you can arrive at this idea if you merge Chomsky and Wittgenstein. So Noam Chomsky has this idea called transformational grammar, where he essentially says that language has a fixed structure, and then when you're generating sentences, what you're doing is you're applying transformations to that original structure to generate identifications and attributions in natural human language, to generate an infinite number of possible expressions. And what Wittgenstein says is that language is what Ludwig Wittgenstein says is that language is the house of being. That when we're talking about what to include within reality, obviously we have certain cognitive, this is what Kant pointed out in his Critique of Pure Reason, that we have certain cognitive and perceptual limitations. So Langen says that which cannot be linguistically described or thought about is not contained within reality, because when you're external for cognitive and perceptual purposes, if you're external to that reality, it's irrelevant. It's external to any relevant model of the universe. So the language, and so this is, give me a moment, just to think. So the language by which the universe self-models, because the attributions and identifications which govern the structure and evolution of the universe is a language that reality. So this is why Langen says that reality is just one moment. So the language by which the universe models itself is called the self-processing, self-configuring language. And it's self-processing and self-configuring because it can't be processed or configured by anything external to it. Its evolution is internal to itself and is identified with its universe of language. That the language and that which it's identifying are not different in any way. So the CTMU, by virtue of it being a theory of everything, is identified with the rules and structure of the universe because it's actually accurately describing them. So the rules and structures to the CTMU is the same as the rules and structure of the universe. It's identified with the conspansive manifold, the structure and evolution of the model representing the structure and evolution of reality over time. That theory, universe, and model, there's a trinity, a triality, what Langen says, between them, where they're all syntactically identified with each other. They all share the same syntax, the same rules and structure. And you actually have all three of those words in the CTMU. You have cognitive, but then you have theoretic, theory, model of the universe. So you have theory, model, universe are all brought into mutual correspondence with one another to get a grand picture of reality. So this is why Langen says that the CTMU is, and in particular the CTMU metaformal system, which is Langen's description of language, which we'll get into in future videos, although I've gotten into some of the basic concepts here, so that's why Langen says the CTMU metaformal system, the CTMU, is the language which the universe talks to itself about itself, thus serving as its own theory, universe, and model, and guiding the structure and evolution of all three. So, and this is not necessarily the CTMU as presently formulated. There can obviously, if you had someone 1,000,000 times more intelligent as a human, you could have a more specific description of reality, but you'll have a more specific description of reality. You won't have a more general description of reality. That for all that you're adding on to it, the CTMU is not meant to be a small pot which chokes all future scientific and philosophical progress, but it's actually likened by Langen to a fertile, well-aerated soil, and I'm butchering the quote here, by which all future knowledge can spring forth and actually be an accurate identification of the universe and explain its own ontology, its own being, and its own epistemology, the attribution of that being, which are coupled in the CTMU to actually form an overall theory of knowledge and being. So this is pretty, weird sounding stuff, and it might seem like we tread onto unstable and unfamiliar metaphysical speculation. But actually those who know the Greco-Christian tradition will know that we now stand on solid ground, that actually everything prior to the identification of reality as language might seem like speculation, but we now stand on solid ground from the perspective of these philosophical languages, and they are languages. So that you'll recall John 1's famous proclamation, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And this is borrowing from the Greek concept of the Logos. What the Greeks knew is that the Logos, the Word, it was the intrinsic order of the cosmos, that it's actually a linguistic order which organizes reality, which organizes the cosmos. And the Word, so the Logos, the Word, is denoting the metalinguistic structure which governs reality. And what John realized is that the Logos could actually be made flesh, that we could live the Logos, and that the Logos was the light which lighteth every man who comes into the world, and that this light is a redemptive force. It's the engine of reconciliation to the one who created all, and that the Logos is both that which created all and that which reconciles everything diffeonically related to that one into a synesis, into a sameness, that it's what reconciles creation to its creator. Closing out this video, but may we all be worthy of that light sooner in our times than we can imagine. Thank you. Let the light shine forth in the darkness, and let the darkness comprehend. May the peace of our Father in heaven be upon you. Like and subscribe. Peace.